Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he tightened the last bolt on the water filtration unit. The twin suns of Kepler 4432b beat down on the small human colony, making every task feel twice as hard. At 18, Jake was one of the older kids in the settlement, and he took his responsibilities seriously. His father had taught him that every piece of equipment could mean the difference between life and death on this alien world. "Jake, you need to see this," Lucy Kane called from across the workyard. The 17-year-old botanist was crouched next to one of her experimental gardens, her blonde hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She had been studying the local plant life for months, trying to find which earth crops could grow in the alien soil. Jake walked over and found Lucy staring at her communication device. The small screen showed incoming signals from deep space. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "Ships," Lucy said, her voice quiet. "Big ones. Coming this way." Jake felt his stomach drop. The colony had been established only 2 years ago, and they were still building basic infrastructure. They had always known that other alien species controlled this part of space, but so far, no one had bothered the small human settlement. Ryan Torres jogged over from the perimeter fence where he had been on guard duty. At 19, he was the closest thing the colony had to military experience, having spent 2 years at Earth's military academy before joining the colonization mission. His dark eyes were serious as he approached. "My dad wants all the young people in the community center," Ryan said. "Right now." The 3 teenagers exchanged worried glances. Jake grabbed his toolkit and followed the others toward the center of the small settlement. The buildings were simple but sturdy, designed to withstand the planet's frequent storms. As they walked, Jake could see other families gathering, their faces tense with worry. Maya Chen was already in the community center when they arrived. The 16-year-old had set up her computer equipment in one corner and was frantically typing. Her black hair fell across her face as she worked, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Maya was the best hacker and communications expert in the colony, despite her young age. "Maya, what are you seeing?" Jake asked. 12 ships, Maya said without looking up. "Big ones. They'll be here in about 6 hours. She paused and looked at her friends. "Jake, these aren't exploration ships. They're warships." Alex Price pushed through the crowd of worried colonists. The 18-year-old medical trainee had been helping in the clinic when the alert came through. His sandy brown hair was messy, and there was concern in his green eyes. "My mom says we need to prepare for evacuation," Alex said. "The adults think whoever is coming might not be friendly." The 5 friends stood together as the adults continued their heated discussions. Jake's father, Chief Engineer Morrison, was talking with the colony leaders. His voice was calm, but Jake could see the worry in his father's eyes. "Children," called Dr. Kane, Lucy's mother and the colony's head of science, "we need you to listen carefully." The young people gathered around as the adults explained the situation. The approaching ships belonged to something called the Zephyrian Empire. The Zephyrians were a reptilian species that controlled this sector of space and did not welcome other species expanding into their territory. "We're going to try to negotiate," explained Commander Torres, Ryan's father and the colony's military leader. "But if that fails, we have a backup plan. We've prepared a hidden shelter in the mountain caves about 10 kilometers from here. If things go badly, you young people will head there and wait for rescue." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The adults were scared, really scared. In 2 years on this planet, he had never seen them look so worried. Over the next few hours, the colonists prepared frantically. They packed emergency supplies, charged communication devices, and reviewed escape routes. The 5 friends helped where they could, but mostly they tried to stay out of the way as their parents prepared for the worst. When the Zephyrian ships finally appeared in the sky, they were bigger than anyone had expected. The vessels were dark and angular, looking more like weapons than transportation. They descended slowly, deliberately, as if the aliens wanted to make sure everyone saw their power. The lead ship landed in the center of the colony's main plaza. Jake watched from a window as a ramp lowered and figures emerged. The Zephyrians were tall and covered in dark green scales. They moved with predatory grace, their yellow eyes scanning everything around them. The alien leader wore elaborate armor and carried what was obviously a weapon. When he spoke, a translation device made his words understandable, but his voice was cold and harsh. "I am Captain Vexthar of the Zephyrian Empire," the alien announced. "This world belongs to the Empire. You mammals will be relocated to a more appropriate location." Commander Torres stepped forward. Captain, we're peaceful colonists. We're willing to negotiate. The Zephyrian captain cut him off with a dismissive gesture. There is nothing to negotiate. You will gather your belongings and board our transport ships. Any resistance will be met with force. Jake watched as his father and the other adults tried to reason with the aliens, but it was clear the Zephyrians had no interest in discussion. They began herding the colonists toward the transport ships, their weapons ready. That was when Commander Torres gave the signal. Jake saw his father nod toward the back of the building where the young people were waiting. It was time for the escape plan. Maya grabbed her portable computer while Alex stuffed medical supplies into his backpack. Lucy collected seeds from her experimental plants and Ryan checked his father's old military radio. Jake made sure he had his tools and the colony's backup communication device. The 5 friends slipped out the back of the community center and began making their way toward the mountain caves. They moved carefully, staying low and using the settlement's buildings for cover. For a moment, Jake thought they might actually make it. Then the Zephyrian hunters found them. The aliens appeared suddenly, moving faster than seemed possible for creatures their size. Jake heard Ryan shout a warning, but it was too late. Energy nets fell from the sky, trapping the 5 teenagers before they could reach the tree line. Jake struggled against the energy net, but it only tightened when he moved. He could see his friends trapped nearby, their faces filled with fear and anger. Through the net, he watched as more Zephyrians approached. Captain Vexthar himself came to examine the captured humans. His reptilian face showed what might have been amusement as he looked down at them. "Young mammals," he said, his translated voice dripping with contempt. "Your adult pack tried to hide you, but we found you anyway." He turned to one of his soldiers. "These cubs are too young for the work camps, but they might provide entertainment." "What kind of entertainment?" the soldier asked. The captain's mouth opened in what Jake realized was probably a smile, showing rows of sharp teeth. "The arena, of course. If these mammals claim to be civilized, let their young prove it in combat. The citizens of Zephyr Prime always enjoy watching primitive species fight for survival." Jake felt his blood turn cold as the implications hit him. They were being taken to fight in some kind of gladiatorial arena. He looked at his friends, saw the same realization dawning in their eyes. As the Zephyrians dragged them toward their ships, Jake made a silent promise. Whatever happened, wherever they were taken, the 5 of them would stick together. They were more than friends, they were family. And families didn't abandon each other no matter what. The journey to Zephyr Prime took 3 weeks in the cramped cargo hold of the Zephyrian transport ship. Jake and his friends were kept in a metal cage barely large enough for all 5 of them to lie down. The aliens fed them scraps of food that tasted like cardboard and gave them water that smelled strange. During the long trip, Jake listened to the Zephyrian crew talking. Their translation devices picked up enough words for him to understand that the aliens were placing bets on which human would die first in the arena. Some thought Alex looked too weak to last more than a day. Others believed Lucy would be the first to break under pressure. "They think we're animals," Maya whispered one night as they huddled together for warmth. Her computer had been taken away, leaving her feeling lost without her technology. "Let them think that," Ryan said quietly. "Maybe it will give us an advantage somehow." Jake wasn't sure what kind of advantage they could have, but he admired Ryan's determination. Even trapped in a cage, his friend was thinking like a soldier, looking for opportunities. When they finally arrived at Zephyr Prime, Jake pressed his face against the small window in their cage. The planet was nothing like their green colony world. Everything was covered in massive gray buildings that stretched up toward the sky. The cities seemed to go on forever, with no plants or open spaces anywhere. At the center of the largest city stood a structure so enormous that Jake had trouble believing it was real. The arena was like a mountain made of metal and stone, rising high above everything around it. Lights flashed around its edges, and even from their ship, Jake could hear the roar of crowds inside. "How many people do you think that thing holds?" Lucy asked, staring at the massive structure. "Millions," Alex said, his voice barely a whisper. "Maybe tens of millions." The ship landed at a dock connected to the arena's lower levels. Zephyrian guards dragged the 5 humans out of their cage and through a series of dark tunnels. The ancient walls were covered with strange markings that looked like tallies or scores. The guard captain, a scarred Zephyrian with one missing eye, seemed to enjoy explaining things to new prisoners. Those marks show how many fights each gladiator survived before dying, he said with obvious pleasure. The record is 47 battles. Most don't make it past 5. They were taken deeper underground to a holding area filled with cells. Jake could see dozens of different alien species locked behind metal bars. Some he recognized from Earth's databases, but others were completely strange. There were creatures with too many arms, beings made of what looked like living crystal, and things that seemed to be part plant and part animal. The humans were thrown into a cell with basic sleeping mats and a bucket of water. The guard captain locked the door and walked away, leaving them alone for the first time in weeks. At least we're together, Lucy said, trying to sound hopeful. Before anyone could respond, a voice spoke from the shadows of the cell next to theirs. Being together won't help you when you're forced to kill each other. Jake turned to see an alien that looked like a combination of a bird and a reptile. It had feathers covering scales, and its eyes were large and intelligent. Despite being locked in a cell, the creature carried itself with dignity. Who are you? Jake asked. I am Talon of the Corvin people, the alien said. I have been a gladiator here for 12 years. I have survived 31 battles. Ryan moved closer to the bars separating their cells. How do you survive so long? Talon's head tilted in what might have been sadness. By being willing to do what others cannot. By fighting without mercy. By remembering that only one gladiator leaves the arena alive. We won't fight each other, Maya said firmly. We're friends. Talon made a sound that could have been laughter, but it wasn't pleasant. That is what they all say at first. The Zephyrians love to capture groups from the same species, especially families or friends. They find great entertainment in watching bonds break under pressure. Alex sat down heavily on one of the mats. How does it work? The fighting, I mean. Different types of battles, Talon explained. Sometimes individual combat, sometimes small groups, sometimes massive battles with dozens of fighters. He paused. For new arrivals like you, they usually start with individual fights, one against one until only the strongest remains. Jake felt sick. And if we refuse to fight? Then they release the hunters, Talon said. Creatures bred specifically to kill slowly and painfully. The crowd enjoys watching resistors get torn apart. Eventually, the pain becomes so great that gladiators choose to fight each other instead. Lucy wrapped her arms around herself. There has to be another way. There is no other way, Talon said. I have seen thousands of prisoners pass through these cells. Some fight immediately. Some resist for days or weeks. But eventually they all fight. The Zephyrians have perfected their system over centuries. That night Jake lay awake listening to the sounds of the arena above them. Even in the middle of the night he could hear crowds cheering and roaring. The entertainment never stopped. In the cell next to them, Talon told them more about arena life. The Zephyrians bred special creatures for different types of battles. Some were fast and poisonous. Others were large and nearly indestructible. The worst were the intelligent ones that could think and plan. The key to survival, Talon said, is to kill quickly and efficiently. The crowd likes blood, but they respect skill. If you can win fights cleanly, you earn better food and medical care. What about escape? Ryan asked. Talon was quiet for a long moment. In 12 years, I have seen 3 escape attempts. All failed. The arena is designed to be impossible to leave. Even if you could get out of your cell, there are thousands of guards between here and the surface. Over the next few days, Jake and his friends watched other prisoners being taken away for battles. Most never came back. Those who did return were often badly injured and barely alive. The medical care Talon had mentioned was basic at best. Jake noticed that the different species kept to themselves. The bird-like corvins stayed in one area. The insect creatures called thrak clustered together in another section. The crystal beings called void-touched rarely moved at all. Why doesn't anyone work together? Jake asked Talon one day. Because the Zephyrians are very clever, Talon replied. They make sure that different species fight against each other in the arena. If corvins started helping thrak prisoners, the arena masters would arrange more corvin versus thrak battles. It is better to stay separate and hope your people are matched against strangers. Jake thought about this for a long time. The system was designed to keep everyone isolated and afraid. No one trusted anyone else because trust could be used against them. On their 5th day in the cells, guards came for the humans. Jake's heart raced as they were dragged through the tunnels toward the arena proper. They could hear the crowd getting louder as they climbed higher into the structure. Finally, they reached a holding area just below the arena floor. Through metal grates, Jake could see the sandy surface where gladiators fought. The arena was even larger than he had imagined. The stands rose up in all directions, filled with cheering Zephyrians. A guard handed each of them basic weapons and pieces of armor. Jake got a short sword that felt too heavy in his hands. Lucy received a spear that was taller than she was. Maya, Alex, and Ryan were given various knives and small shields. "First battle for the Terran Cubs," announced a guard. "The crowd has been excited to see what mammals can do in combat." Jake looked at his friends. They were all scared, but he could see determination in their eyes too. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The arena gates began to open and bright sunlight poured in. Jake could hear an announcer speaking to the crowd in the Zephyrian language. The translation came through speakers in their holding area. "Citizens of the Empire," the announcer roared. "Today we present 5 young mammals from the species called humans. These creatures are known for their pack-bonding behavior and emotional attachments. Let us see how long such weaknesses last in the sacred arena." The guards pushed them forward toward the open gates. Jake took a deep breath and stepped into the blazing sun and deafening roar of millions of alien spectators. The sand beneath his feet was stained with the blood of countless previous battles. But as he looked around at his 4 friends, Jake felt something the Zephyrians clearly didn't expect to see. He felt hope. The arena sand felt hot under Jake's feet as he and his 4 friends walked out into the blazing artificial suns. The roar of the crowd was deafening. Millions of Zephyrians filled the stands, their scales glittering in the bright light as they cheered for blood and death. Jake looked around at the massive circular space. The arena floor was easily the size of several football fields. High walls surrounded them, too smooth and tall to climb. At the top, he could see the royal viewing box where the most important Zephyrians sat. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena through speakers hidden throughout the structure. The translation made his words clear to the human prisoners. "Behold the Terran Cubs," the announcer declared. "These mammals claim to be intelligent, civilized beings. But we know the truth. When faced with death, all creatures show their true nature. Watch as these so-called friends tear each other apart for the chance to live one more day." Jake felt his stomach twist. He looked at his friends and saw the same sick realization in their eyes. The Zephyrians expected them to fight each other. They wanted to watch the humans destroy their own friendships for survival. Lucy gripped her spear with shaking hands. "Jake, what do we do?" The crowd was getting louder, more excited. Jake could see Zephyrians in the stands making gestures that probably meant they were placing bets on which human would die first. "We don't fight each other," Jake said firmly. "We're not animals." "But if we don't fight, they'll send in those hunter creatures Talon told us about," Alex said. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. Ryan hefted his weapon and looked around the arena. "Then we deal with the hunters together." Maya nodded. "Jake's right. We're not going to give them what they want." Jake felt a surge of pride in his friends. Even here, even facing death, they were choosing to stick together. He called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Listen to me," Jake shouted. "We came here as friends and we're staying as friends, no matter what happens." The 5 humans moved closer together, forming a tight circle with their backs to each other and their weapons pointing outward. It wasn't a fighting stance the Zephyrians expected to see. The crowd noise changed. The excited cheering became confused murmuring. Jake could hear individual Zephyrians calling out in their own language, probably asking why the humans weren't attacking each other. The announcer sounded annoyed when he spoke again. The Terran Cubs seemed confused about the nature of arena combat. Perhaps they need encouragement. Gates opened around the arena floor and creatures began emerging. Jake had never seen anything like them. They looked like a cross between wolves and lizards, with rows of sharp teeth and claws that scraped against the stone as they moved. There were 6 of them, and they spread out to surround the humans. "These are hunter beasts," the announcer explained to the crowd. "They will encourage our reluctant gladiators to fight properly." The creatures began circling the humans, making low growling sounds. Jake could smell something like sulfur coming from their mouths. One of them lunged toward Lucy, but Ryan stepped sideways and deflected it with his shield. "Stay together," Jake called out. "Don't let them separate us." What happened next surprised everyone, including Jake. Instead of panicking or breaking apart, the 5 humans began working as a team. Maya used her knowledge of animal behavior to predict where the creatures would attack. Lucy identified poisonous plants growing in small patches around the arena and called out warnings about which areas to avoid. Alex moved constantly between his friends, checking for injuries and offering quick medical advice. Ryan coordinated their movements like a military unit, calling out directions and keeping them in formation. Jake used his engineering knowledge to spot weaknesses in the creature's movements and attacks. When one of the hunter beasts got too close, they drove it back without breaking their defensive circle. When another tried to attack from above by leaping, they moved as one unit to avoid it. The crowd was no longer cheering. The arena had gone strangely quiet except for the growling of the frustrated hunter beasts and the sound of the humans' coordinated movements. After an hour of failed attacks, the hunter beasts were recalled through the gates. Jake and his friends were breathing hard and covered in sweat. But none of them had been seriously injured. More importantly, none of them had raised a weapon against each other. The announcer sounded confused and angry. The Terran cubs continue to show their primitive pack behavior. Perhaps stronger encouragement is needed. Jake looked up at the royal viewing box and saw movement. A figure in elaborate armor was standing up, clearly agitated. Even from this distance, Jake could see that this Zephyrian was larger and more decorated than the others. "That must be someone important," Lucy whispered. The important Zephyrian began making his way down from the viewing box. Guards cleared a path as he walked onto the arena floor. When he was close enough, Jake could see that his armor was covered in intricate designs and his scales were darker than the other Zephyrians. "I am Emperor Zexthan," the alien announced, his voice carrying clearly across the arena without amplification. "I rule this empire and control the fate of every creature in this arena." Jake felt his friends tense up beside him, but they maintained their circle formation. "You mammals refuse to fight each other," the Emperor continued. "You cling to your pack bonds like primitive animals. Very well. I will give you proper motivation." The Emperor gestured and a large screen appeared above the arena. Jake's heart stopped when he saw what was displayed. It was a live video feed from their colony back on Kepler 442b. He could see his father working on a water pump. Lucy's mother was tending to plants in the greenhouse. All their families were there, going about their daily work under the guard of Zephyrian soldiers. "Fight each other," Emperor Zexthan commanded, "or watch me give the order to execute every adult in your colony. Your pack bonds will be the death of everyone you love." Jake felt the world spinning around him. This was exactly what the Zephyrians wanted. They weren't just threatening the 5 friends. They were threatening everyone they cared about. He looked at his friends and saw the same anguish in their faces. Lucy was crying quietly. Alex looked like he might be sick. Maya's hands were shaking as she gripped her weapon. Ryan spoke first. "Jake, maybe we should—" "No," Jake said firmly. He looked up at the Emperor and then at the massive crowd. "No, we won't do it." Instead of raising his weapon, Jake did something no one expected. He dropped his sword in the sand and linked arms with Lucy. She understood immediately and dropped her spear, linking arms with Maya. One by one, all 5 humans dropped their weapons and linked arms in a chain. Then Jake began to sing. It was an old song his grandmother had taught him, one that had been sung by people facing impossible situations for hundreds of years. His voice was shaky at first, but it grew stronger as his friends joined in. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Their voices carried across the silent arena. Jake had never heard the song sound so beautiful or so defiant. They were 5 young humans far from home, facing an empire that wanted to break their spirits. But they were singing together, and that made them strong. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the Emperor seemed stunned by their response. "I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." Jake looked around the arena and realized something incredible was happening. In the stands, he could see other species besides Zephyrians. There were Corvins and Thrak and other creatures he didn't recognize. Many of them were leaning forward, listening intently to the human song. Some of the alien spectators had tears in their eyes. Others were looking at each other as if they were remembering something they had forgotten long ago. The song ended, but the 5 humans remained linked together in the center of the arena. Emperor Zexathon stood frozen, clearly not knowing how to respond to this act of defiance. Finally, the Emperor found his voice. "Take them back to their cells," he ordered the guards. "I need time to consider how to deal with this situation." As the guards approached, Jake felt a strange sense of victory. They hadn't won their freedom and their families were still in danger. But they had done something the Zephyrians hadn't expected. They had shown the entire arena that some bonds couldn't be broken by threats or violence. As they were led back toward the tunnels, Jake heard something that made his heart race. From somewhere in the crowd, an alien voice began singing their song. Then another voice joined in, and another. By the time they reached the tunnel entrance, hundreds of voices throughout the arena were singing Amazing Grace in dozens of different languages and alien dialects. Jake smiled as the guards pushed them into the darkness. The Zephyrians had wanted to see humans fight each other. Instead, they had given the galaxy something much more dangerous. They had given it hope. Back in their cell, Jake and his friends sat in the darkness and tried to process what had happened. The sound of alien voices singing their song still echoed in their minds. Even through the thick walls of the underground prison, they could hear unusual activity throughout the arena complex. "Did you see their faces?" Lucy asked quietly. Some of those aliens in the crowd looked like they were remembering something. Talon spoke from the neighboring cell. His voice sounded different than before, less certain. "In 12 years of fighting, I have never seen anything like what you did today. The crowd should have demanded your immediate execution for refusing to fight. But they didn't," Maya said. "They started singing with us." Jake could hear other prisoners talking in the darkness. Conversations were happening between cells that had been silent before. Species that had kept to themselves for years were suddenly speaking to each other. Over the next few days, word of the humans' refusal to fight spread throughout the prison levels. Jake noticed that other gladiators were looking at them differently. The fear and suspicion that had kept everyone isolated was beginning to crack. On the third day after their arena appearance, something unprecedented happened. A group of Corvin prisoners approached their cell during the daily exercise period. "We have been discussing your actions," said one of the bird-like creatures. "My name is Soren. I have fought in the arena for 8 years." "What kind of discussing?" Ryan asked. Soren exchanged glances with his fellow Corvins. "We have been thinking about our own bonds. Before we were captured, Corvins fought in flocks. We protected each other, but in this place we have been forced to fight alone." Another Corvin named Kira spoke up. "Yesterday they matched me against my own nest brother. I won by killing him as the arena demanded. But watching you humans refuse to fight each other, it made me remember who I used to be." Jake felt a chill. He couldn't imagine having to kill Ryan or Alex or any of his friends. "We're sorry," he said. "That must have been horrible." "It was necessary for survival," Soren said, but his voice suggested he no longer believed that. "Or so we told ourselves." Later that day, Jake noticed that the Corvin prisoners were no longer keeping completely to themselves. They were talking quietly with some of the Thrak insect creatures. The crystalline void-touched beings had even moved closer to the other cells. Maya had been working on something in secret. She had managed to salvage small pieces of electronics from broken arena equipment during their exercise periods. Now she was trying to build a simple communication device. "If I can tap into the arena's information systems," she explained, "maybe I can find out what's happening in other parts of the galaxy." It took her a week, but finally Maya's makeshift device picked up interstellar communication signals. What she found amazed all of them. "Jake, listen to this," Maya whispered, showing him the small screen she had created. "There are news reports from across the galaxy. Our story is spreading." The reports were in dozens of different languages, but Maya's device could translate most of them. On world after world, the story of 5 young humans who refused to fight each other was inspiring others to question the systems that oppressed them. On a mining planet in the Outer Rim, worker species that had been kept separated for centuries were beginning to cooperate. On trade stations throughout Zephyrian space, different alien species were forming alliances instead of competing against each other. "Look at this one," Lucy said, pointing to a report from a planet called Drakmor. "The local species there have been fighting a civil war for 50 years. But after hearing about us, some of the factions are calling for peace talks." Jake felt overwhelmed. "All we did was refuse to hurt each other." "Sometimes that's enough," Alex said quietly. "Sometimes one small act of courage can change everything." But the reports also brought bad news. Emperor Zexthon was mobilizing his forces to crush the growing unrest. Rebellions were being put down violently across the empire. Many beings were dying for the crime of hoping for something better. "It's our fault," Lucy said, her voice breaking. "People are dying because of what we did." Talon's voice came from the next cell. "No, young human. People are dying because they chose to remember what it means to be free. That choice was always theirs to make. You simply reminded them it was possible." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of marching feet. Arena guards were coming, and there were a lot of them. Jake and his friends pressed against the bars of their cell, trying to see what was happening. Emperor Zexithon himself appeared in the corridor, surrounded by his elite guards. His face was a mask of controlled rage as he stopped in front of their cell. "You 5 mammals have caused considerable trouble," the Emperor said. "Your little display of defiance has inspired unrest across my empire. Productivity is down. Rebellions are breaking out on 12 different worlds. All because you refuse to behave like proper gladiators." Jake found his voice. "We just refuse to hurt our friends. And that refusal has cost me millions of lives and vast amounts of resources," the Emperor snapped. "But I have found a solution to the problem you have created." Guards began opening cell doors throughout the prison level. Not just the human cell, but all of them. Hundreds of gladiators from dozens of species were being forced out of their cells and into the corridors. "Tomorrow," Emperor Zexthon announced, "we will hold the greatest arena battle in the history of the Empire. Every gladiator currently in the prison will fight in a single massive battle. Only 10 survivors will be allowed to live. The rest will die in glorious combat." Jake felt his heart sink. This was the Emperor's answer to their message of unity. He would force everyone to fight everyone else in a battle so chaotic and desperate that no one would be able to maintain bonds or alliances. And to ensure that this battle is properly motivated, the Emperor continued with a cruel smile, "I will be broadcasting live feeds from every world where rebellions have occurred. For each hour that gladiators refuse to fight properly, I will order the execution of 1,000 rebels." The Emperor gestured to a wall screen that flickered to life. It showed scenes from across the galaxy. On some worlds, beings were holding peaceful protests. On others, they were actively fighting Zephyrian forces. All of them would die if the gladiators didn't provide the entertainment the Emperor demanded. "You wanted to inspire others," Emperor Zexthon said to Jake. "Congratulations. Now their lives depend on your willingness to abandon your precious bonds and fight like the animals you truly are." As the Emperor left, Jake looked around at the hundreds of other prisoners filling the corridors. There were species he recognized and others that were completely alien to him. All of them were looking at the humans with expressions that ranged from curiosity to anger to something that might have been hope. Soren the Corvin approached Jake carefully. "What do we do now, young human? Your refusal to fight was inspiring when it only affected 5 lives, but now millions depend on our actions tomorrow." Jake looked at his 4 friends, then at the sea of alien faces surrounding them. Maya was working frantically on her communication device, trying to get more information about the rebellions. Lucy was talking quietly with some of the plant-based aliens, comparing notes about their homeworlds. Alex was already treating injuries on gladiators who had been hurt in recent battles. Ryan was studying the mix of species, probably trying to figure out how they could all work together. "We do the same thing we did before," Jake said, finally. "We refuse to fight each other." "But the rebels will die," protested a Thrak warrior. "The rebels are dying anyway," Jake replied. "The Emperor will kill them whether we fight or not. The only question is whether we die as entertainment for his people, or whether we die standing up for what we believe in." Jake raised his voice so everyone could hear him. "Tomorrow we have a choice. We can tear each other apart for the Emperor's amusement, or we can show the galaxy that some things are more important than survival." "What things?" called out a voice from the crowd. Jake thought of his family back on the colony, of all the beings across the galaxy who were risking everything for a chance at freedom, of the song that had united different species in a moment of shared hope. "Each other," he said simply. "We can show them that we choose each other." The great arena had never held so many gladiators at once. Jake estimated there were nearly 1,000 beings from dozens of different species scattered across the massive sandy floor. The stands were packed beyond capacity with Zephyrians who had come to witness what their Emperor promised would be the most spectacular battle in arena history. Jake and his friends stood in the center of the chaos. Surrounded by aliens of every imaginable size and shape, some of the gladiators were eyeing each other suspiciously, hands on their weapons. Others seemed to be waiting to see what the humans would do. Emperor Zexthon occupied his royal viewing box, surrounded by screens showing the rebellions happening across his empire. Jake could see peaceful protesters on some worlds, active fighting on others. All of them would pay the price if the gladiators didn't provide enough entertainment. Citizens of the Empire, the Emperor's voice boomed across the arena. Today you witness the ultimate test of survival. 1,000 gladiators will fight until only 10 remain. Those 10 will earn their freedom. The rest will die as nature intended. The crowd roared its approval. Weapons were distributed to those who didn't already have them. Jake received the same short sword he had carried before. His friends got their familiar weapons too. Remember, the Emperor continued, for every hour these creatures refuse to fight properly, 1,000 rebels die across the galaxy. Their blood will be on the hands of any gladiator who chooses cowardice over combat. Jake looked around at the sea of faces surrounding him. He could see fear, anger, desperation, and something else. In the eyes of many gladiators, especially the ones who had been in the prison the longest, he saw hope. "What do we do?" Lucy whispered. Before Jake could answer, Soren the Corvin stepped forward. The bird-like warrior raised his weapon high in the air, but instead of pointing it at another gladiator, he drove it point first into the sand. "I will not fight my fellow prisoners," Soren announced in a voice that carried across the arena. "I choose to remember who I was before this place tried to make me forget." One by one, other Corvins followed Soren's example. They planted their weapons in the sand and stepped back, forming a circle around the buried blades. The crowd noise changed from excitement to confusion. This wasn't what they had come to see. Then Kira, the Corvin who had been forced to kill her own nest brother, began to sing. It wasn't the human song from before, but a Corvin mourning chant for the dead. Other Corvins joined their voices to hers, creating a harmony that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. The Thrak warriors looked at each other uncertainly. Jake could see them having some kind of rapid conversation in their clicking language. Finally, their leader, a massive insect being called Zeph, made a decision. Instead of burying their weapons, the Thrak formed a defensive formation around the singing Corvins. They kept their weapons ready, but they pointed them outward toward the arena walls, not at other gladiators. "We protect the singers," Zeph announced. "No one harms those who mourn the dead." More species began making similar choices. The crystalline void-touched beings linked themselves together in a formation that looked like living artwork. Plant-based aliens from the outer rim worlds began growing roots into the arena sand, literally anchoring themselves in place. But not everyone was ready to give up fighting. About a quarter of the gladiators, mostly those who had been arena fighters for many years, looked around at the peaceful demonstrations with disgust. "This is madness," shouted a scarred reptilian warrior Jake didn't recognize. "The Emperor will kill us all if we don't fight." "The Emperor will kill us anyway," Jake replied, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "At least this way we die as ourselves, not as his entertainment." The warrior snarled and raised his weapon. "Then you can die first, human." Jake didn't back down, but he also didn't raise his sword. Instead, he looked directly at the attacking gladiator and spoke clearly. "If you need to kill me to feel strong, then do it. But know that you're choosing to be exactly what they want you to be." The warrior hesitated, his weapon halfway through its swing. Around the arena, hundreds of beings were watching this moment. Jake could feel the weight of their attention. "I don't want to be their creature anymore," the warrior said quietly, lowering his weapon. "But I don't know how to be anything else." Alex stepped forward, his medical training making him sensitive to pain in all its forms. "You start by choosing not to hurt someone today," he said gently. "That's all. Just one choice." The warrior looked around at the peaceful formations of gladiators, at the Corvins still singing their mourning song, at the humans who had started it all by refusing to fight each other. Slowly, he planted his weapon in the sand next to Soren's. That was the moment Jake realized they had already won, regardless of what happened next. The Emperor had wanted to break their unity by forcing them into an impossible choice. Instead, he had given them the largest platform in the galaxy to demonstrate that unity was possible. But Emperor Zexthon was not ready to accept defeat. His voice echoed across the arena, filled with rage. If they will not fight for sport, then they will die for defiance. Release the execution squad. Gates opened around the arena perimeter, but instead of wild animals or hunter beasts, Zephyrian soldiers poured onto the sand. They carried energy weapons and wore full combat armor. Their orders were clearly to kill every gladiator in the arena. Jake felt a moment of despair. All their courage and unity meant nothing against modern military weapons. But then Maya's voice cut through the noise. "Jake, look at the screens." Jake looked up at the displays showing various worlds across the Empire. What he saw took his breath away. The rebellions were growing. On world after world, beings who had been watching the arena broadcast were laying down their tools and weapons, forming peaceful demonstrations just like the gladiators. They were singing songs in dozens of languages, linking arms across species barriers, and refusing to cooperate with their Zephyrian overlords. More importantly, Jake could see Zephyrian civilians joining the demonstrations. Not many, but enough to matter. The Empire's own citizens were beginning to question whether this was the kind of society they wanted to live in. "The message is spreading faster than they can stop it," Maya said, her makeshift communication device crackling with intercepts from across the galaxy. "It's not just the enslaved species anymore. Zephyrians are starting to rebel too." The execution squad was halfway across the arena when something extraordinary happened. Explosions echoed from above and chunks of debris began falling from the arena's upper levels. "What's happening?" Lucy asked. Ryan, with his military training, recognized the sounds. "That's not random damage. Someone's attacking the arena from outside." The answer came when the main gates of the arena were blown open and figures began pouring through. Jake could hardly believe what he was seeing. The attacking force was made up of multiple species working together. Corvins flying alongside Thrak ground forces, crystalline beings providing shields for plant-based aliens carrying weapons. At the front of the mixed force, Jake recognized some faces from the colony rescue mission. They had come for the humans, but they had brought help from across the galaxy. The arena erupted into chaos as the rescue force clashed with Zephyrian security. But the gladiators in the center remained calm. They had made their choice to stand together, and they weren't going to abandon it now. Jake grabbed Maya's communication device and boosted its signal as high as it would go. "This is Jake Morrison," he broadcast on all frequencies. "We're 5 humans who refuse to fight our friends. We're standing in the arena with 1,000 beings from dozens of species who chose unity over survival. And we're showing the galaxy that the Empire's greatest weakness is that it never learned how to build anything except fear." The broadcast was picked up by communication networks across Zephyrian space. Jake's words, translated into hundreds of languages, reached billions of beings on thousands of worlds. "The Empire tells you that different species can't work together, that you need them to maintain order. But look around this arena. Look at your own worlds. We're already working together. We just needed to remember that we could." The rescue force had fought their way to the gladiators' position. Jake could see aliens of species he had never encountered before, all working together to evacuate the prisoners. Some were providing medical care. Others were setting up defensive positions. Still others were helping gladiators who were too weak to move on their own. Emperor Zexthon's voice could be heard over the arena's communication system, ordering reinforcements and threatening massive retaliation. But Jake noticed that many of his own guards were hesitating to follow orders. The unity they were witnessing was making even trained soldiers question their loyalty. As the evacuation continued, Jake found himself next to Talon, the old Corvin gladiator who had survived 31 battles. "What will you do now?" Jake asked. "When this is over?" Talon looked around at the mixed species working together to save each other. "I think I will go home," he said. "For the first time in 12 years, I believe there might be a home worth returning to." The escape from the arena took hours. Fighting continued throughout the complex as rescue forces battled Zephyrian security, but the gladiators moved as a coordinated group, protecting each other and refusing to